just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, Friday Jobber, the 24th of May 2019 is the date, and Boston Red here in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. A very interesting last few days. We had a meeting at the White House where the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, the leader in the Senate for the Democrats, met with one DJ Trump. Evidently, DJ got upset by Nancy Pelosi and stormed out of the meeting, or departed the meeting, depending on which part of the story that you think is factual. The meeting abruptly broke off on infrastructure. DJ claims he knows infrastructure. Well, I'm not sure how many highways he's built, but he's built a lot of apartments, developed golf courses. Also, we'll give him credit for being in the construction game. He does know how to run the various heavy equipment, which resonates with the working class. He can do that, and no doubt he could drive a semi also. But this is really not the question here. The question here is DJ Trump and his balance, his equilibrium, we'll call it, and Nancy Pelosi claims he needs to have an intervention by his family or by his staff. In other words, that he's insane. Well, that's a value judgment there. My take on that, old DJ is just being a DJ. He's thrown temper tantrums for a very long time. I once worked for a fellow that threw temper tantrums, but a little bit more than DJ. I don't know if DJ is throwing books around the White House and various other things or not. He's just probably ranting and raving. But there have been a lot of ranters and ravers in politics. There have also been a lot of people that were nutcases
and a lot of thieves. What the Trump administration has to look out is a teapot dome type behavior. As we leave here, there's a little segment by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Elizabeth Warren on the Sears debacle there. Eddie Lampert, who was the CEO of Sears, he's still there, but he came in there with one of these hedge fund operations, and they looted Sears, literally. Not only did Eddie destroy the Sears, but he also was able to appropriate various real estate and sell it back to Sears, the oldest trick in the book, no doubt about that. Those are teapot dome type of capers, and in the post there's a situation, we'll call it, between some donor to the Trump campaign that is based in North Dakota and is capable of building walls. Now, these are the types of behavior that brings about an atmosphere of corruptness. This is the same thing we have in various countries, Nigeria, to name one. They have evidently in Colombia, Uruguay, several places. In fact, in South Africa, one of the vice presidential appointees is held up because of corruption. So there's corruption all over the world. The World Bank and IMF have talked about so-called transparency and the problem of corruption. Now, this is in emerging nations, banana republics, what have you. Now it is in a Main Street USA. These are issues that will eventually cement. Now we're in May of 2019, and the election is not until November of 2020. Plenty of time to develop a teapot dome type situation. And at the same time, you have impeachment, what they call the M word. And this impeachment is different from any one that we have seen in our lifetime, starting out with Watergate. Of course, Tricky Dick left town before they could impeach him. William Jefferson Clinton was impeached by the House, trial before the Senate, and found not guilty. Excuse me. Impeachable offenses are high crimes and misdemeanors. That's in the Constitution. And depending on your political situation, as an objective, has DJ Trump committed high crimes and misdemeanors according to the historic definition? Yes. Could he be convicted or impeached? At this time, no, because the Republicans control the votes in the Senate, as the Democrats did during President Clinton's impeachment saga. But it would go down in the history books. Didn't affect President Clinton because during this whole escapade, which was called the Monica Lewinsky episode with an intern. Now that's a little different there. And of course, there's also, it started with someone named Paula Jones that was in Arkansas. So this was actually prior to Bill Clinton taking office. There was a Whitewater land deal. Nothing substantial ever came out of Whitewater. But this is different. With DJ's case, this is more teapot dome-ish. And we're starting not seeing one or two or three cases. We're seeing multiples. We could have 100 instances here, literally, that it could be in articles of impeachment. So stay tuned on that one. On another front, the publisher, journalist Julian Assange has been charged with 18 counts under the Espionage Act. That's in the U.S. Goes back to World War I, and the Red Scares, way back there. And they've charged him with all sorts of things, collusion with Chelsea Manning, who has already been to jail. Chelsea's in jail again, but as Chelsea said before she would testify, she just simply starved him. She's been to jail, she's been to prison, she's been in solitary confinement. She knows the ropes. Nothing will come out of that. And it is a rehash of materials brought up against her in her own indictment and later conviction and imprisonment. So we've not come to any new position in that particular case. So we'll look at that. We'll also have our friends from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and we always honor Heber, who was murdered there by white supremacists in the city of Charlottesville, Virginia. And we have a very disturbing story from the Museum of Fine Art in Boston about just nasty racism there. We'll talk about that, using the globe to stand back upon. And tomorrow on The Week That Was, we'll cover the latest evidence from the murder trial of Christine DeMond out in the Midwest city of Minneapolis. Some of the recordings have been released, her 911 call, and some other recordings. There more will be coming. They have hours and hours of it, of the police there circling the wagons. And I noted, looking at one of the, listening to one of the local TV stations, they had some supposed FBI retired type on that backed up the police with all the chaos that was involved, supposedly, and telling Noor to keep his mouth shut. Well, that is the blue wall of silence, and that's unfortunate when you have the corporate media backing up these fallacious claims. And at the same time, there was a settlement hearing to settle a case involving Jamar Clark, who was a young African-American, 24 years old, murdered by the police in the city of Minneapolis. They had offered some lowball figure, but the city council itself had to reject, and then they were called into Judge Davis's office, and no doubt read the riot act. That usually happens when the judge is moving people to settle a lawsuit. They did not reach an agreement. The estate of Mr. Clark is asking for the same amount as in the DeMond case, $20 million. They will not get $20 million, but we'll see what happens, and there will be a trial. Now, some of these characters that were involved in his murder were also at the scene of the Justine DeMond murder after she was killed. They weren't there when she was killed, but after she was killed. So we're beginning to see more of a pattern, and this is nationwide. So the case is not only a so-called local case, but a national case that has been internationalized. Cause célèbre is what we were thinking about, the term there. So those are some of the things that are swirling around, and we'll take a look at some of the polling. Basically, Joe Lunchbox Biden has been in the 30s, then comes Bernie, and then comes Elizabeth Warren in most of these polls so far. But what do they mean? Not a lot, because we know that Elizabeth Warren has a very good organization. Bernie has had to move a little bit differently in his fundraising to do more of a collective or a group type fundraiser to get the amount of funding up. They were running about $25, but now they're running, say, about 15. Now, part of this is that the people that are donating the money are under financial strain. So what this means is the campaigns, all of them, have to be run much more efficiently from a financial standpoint. Let me go to the general roundup now. We'll be relying on the Washington Post and various others. We'll start the story off in Boston at the This is on the 23rd. This would be at the Museum of Fine Arts, found itself on the siege as educators, politicians, civil rights types assaulted a renowned institution. Reports that people of color, I'll change the word for minority students, from Dorchester Middle School were subjected to racial insults and close scrutiny during a field trip. That is pathetic. The mayor, Mayor Walsh, called the allegations disturbing, no doubt about that, while the city council president Andrea Campbell decried them as sad and unacceptable. An official with the NAACP questioned whether the 149-year-old museum, one of the nation's largest, had violated federal and state anti-discrimination laws during the May 13th outing by 26 seventh graders, and they were from the Helen Y. Davis Leadership Academy. It doesn't surprise me that there are instances of racism and discrimination in this city. That is from Jose Lopez, the chair of the Education Committee of the Boston NAACP. What does surprise me is the target of it would be children. Museum of Fine Arts director there, Matthew Tenenbaum, said that the museum wants to be a place where individuals and communities can connect and safely express their identities. That's why what happened this past week has been so hard for us, Tenenbaum said, because it's exactly counter to the kind of language, expression, and a meaning and purpose we are using when we describe the museum space. Museum spokesman Karen Franconer, I guess, said the allegations are being investigated internally. They need to be investigated by, not internally, but by the appropriate agencies in the city of Boston, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the federal authorities. Officials of the museum visited the charter school to discuss what had happened. According to students and teachers, the field trip reward for good grades and good behavior left the students deeply hurt. That is from Marvelli Limi, a teacher who accompanied the group and posted about the incident on Facebook. One student, a 13-year-old Carolina Brown, said she knows the group from the Davis Academy were treated differently soon after they walked into the museum to see an ancient Greek and Egyptian artifacts after studying them in a Western civilization class. Upon their arrival, Brown said a staff member explained the rules: no food, no drinks, no watermelon. Then Brown said the children, their classmates, no security guards following them around the exhibits, telling them not to touch the artifacts and paying close attention to them than they did to European students from other schools who were visiting the museum. I didn't feel comfortable, Brown said. I didn't feel safe. I felt disrespected. I felt anger. Her mother, Tara Brown, said her daughter came home that day asking why she and her classmates had been treated differently from others. And you go to the Globe, there is a picture there of Helen of Ms. Brown. The Davis teacher and one of the students overheard a patron listening to a pupil to a snapper as she danced likening a pupil to a stripper, sorry about that, as she danced to music in a fashion exhibit, gender bending. And another visitor complained that there was exhibitive African children in her way, in the way, Carolina Brown said that the museum officials who came to the school Thursday did not seem to take their concerns seriously, no doubt. When they were talking, it sounded like they were nomenclature. She said, Welch has said he's not spoken with the officials at the museum, but that the reports I've heard are disturbing. We haven't had the institution in our city, in our state, in our... we can't, being disrespectful like that. Added, it's just uncalled for. No doubt about that. The incident occurred amidst an effort by the museum to broaden its reach to communities of color. In 2015, an interview with WBUR, museum officials said that 79% of the visitors were Europeans. In addition, and that's almost about 20% of the 700 plus members of the staff identified themselves as non-white. Of those, only 14% were professional jobs, such as curators, conservators, educators, management coordinators. So in other words, they are on brooms and whistles. In 2017, a series on race in Boston, the Globe spotlighted team counted the number of patrons of the Museum of Fine Arts on Saturday and found that about 4%, roughly 3,000, were African American. By contrast, more than 90% of the Davis School 216 students are African Americans or Latinos. About 95% of the school staff are people of color. That is from Arturo Forrester, the principal. The museum's strategic plan unveiled 2 years ago, called NFA 2020. The institution pledged to strive to be a meeting place of world cultures, expressed locally and internationally. We will honor all visitors. We will invite many voices. That sounds kind of suspicious within itself. Museum fell far short of that goal this week, critics say. This is disgusting, disheartening. That's from the Senator Nick Collins of South Boston. Said in a tweet, we need to listen to the experiences of young people of color when they say they are faced with discrimination, institutional racism daily. This is what it looks like. Carol Rose, executive director of the ACLU of Massachusetts, said the incident shows how pervasive racism is, from discriminatory practices in public spaces like museums to our criminal justice system that disproportionately incarcerates people of color. There is much work to be done to achieve a sustainable progress towards racial justice. Marconi Barros, Chief Community Engagement for the Mass Attorney General and a member of the Everett School Committee, also had sharp words. Canceling my membership, no plan to be there anytime soon. He tweeted, apology only for racism is not enough. In an open letter posted on the museum's website, the MFA apologized to students and to the school for a range of challenging, unacceptable experiences that made them feel uncomfortable. This is not who we are or who we want to be. Our intention is to set the highest standards, and we are committed to doing the work that we take to get there. They should already be there. This is 2019. A former employee of the museum, 9-year staff from Roxbury, who has not to be identified, said she was not surprised at the allegations. We have been that way for years, said the woman who worked in member and visitor services until 2015, saying during her time at the Museum of Fine Arts, she said her department employed no Latinos and one African American person who was in a part-time temporary position for 6 months. The former employee was a minority who worked at the museum, appeared to be limited to security employees, security, kitchen, or cleaning jobs. As we've said, I lived near the museum. I live in Boston, and the front line of staff doesn't resemble us at all. Museums, theaters, galleries across the city have attempted to tackle racism with a wide variety of approaches, from anti-bias training to altering the way that art is displayed. The Boston Center for the Arts recently hosted a 2-day anti-racism training in which members discussed the definition of white supremacy. Gabrielle Stewart Gardner's museum hosts implicit bias training for every worker throughout the spring, where participants discuss structural racism, what we used to call systematic racism. Organizations have emphasized outreach to students in local schools in an effort to increase diversity. The Huntington Theater Company, for example, partnered with the Coleman Academy in Dorchester and offered students free tickets to certain matinees. Well, this whole thing is very, very unfortunate at best. It should not happen, and very firm measures need to be taken, not slaps on the face, not casual types of reaction. In other words, reaction as it just was something that is quite ordinary, and they really didn't believe it was a priority. Institutional or structural racism is one of the big things that affect people of color, African Americans, Latinos, and women. There's no doubt about that. It is out there, and we at this mic have been involved in many cases of systematic discrimination, structural discrimination, over 40 years, quite literally. And it, under this present administration, has been amplified. And much of this type of behavior has not been called out in the public sphere. Now that we have the tools, i.e. social media and various other things, to call it out, we applaud the Globe for calling it out. They should. That is part of their fiduciary duty, to an economic term there, corporate term actually, that we don't see as much of. We see it taken on tacitly. And when we say, well, DJ Trump is there, well, DJ Trump doesn't work at the Boston Museum of Fine Art, period. So that extends to the people that are there, and they need to shape up or be shipped out. I mean, that is the whole situation, and to send some people down to just do a pro forma apology is not the way to clear this matter up. The NACP should perform its own investigation. This place is almost 150 years old. It's been around a very, very long period of time. We used to go there when we were much younger and look at the place, but the place itself is just as it was basically when Dr. King, no doubt, went through the door. Period. Of course, he wasn't with a high school class, so it probably wasn't noticed as much. But in the 60s, they would have been much more on their toes than they are today. They have not worked on it, and even people that appear in those places themselves, and this is part of the problem. The fine arts in America, the people that are around these museums, have always been anti-people of color and anti-working class. Let's expand those problems there. Working people normally don't have time to get these museums. They are not patrons of the arts. So that in itself, you imagine there, no food, no drink, no watermelons. I mean, you would imagine that staffer should be fired. So this case needs to be followed up, and vigorously followed up. This is ridiculous. You have 700 workers there, and about 20% are people of color. 14%, only 14% were in quote-unquote so-called professional jobs. I'm not sure what those professional jobs were. Is where the charter school was a Latino, African American charter school, period. And they're not getting many voices. They're indoctrinated there, or they're greeted by a racist. So that is not what they were trying to do. But we extend that from the criminal justice system to museums and on to the White House. So in other words, when you see in the newspapers, on TV broadcasts, all of this racism is sent out to DJ Trump and his gang, not true. These people were in place before he got there. His gang just exploited people that were there. This explains the vote. The so-called silent majority. They have done damage to this nation much more than, quote-unquote, the Russian activities in 2016. They played fast and loose with many things, including even the racist campaign in 2008 by the Monster Clinton and company there. They've used racism. So DJ Trump's not the first one to use racism. Nor was Tricky Dick. That was Richard Nixon. They came out with it. They exploited, but all these characters have been opportunists on the scene. Let me just check on our time here, and we'll go to this. Yeah, we got time. This is the North Dakota situation. He always brings them up. Ties steer a border wall deal to a firm in North Dakota. This is from the Trump had personally and repeatedly urged the Army Corps of Engineers to award a border wall contract to a North Dakota construction company whose top executive is a GOP donor, and he's frequently on Fox News. This is pushed out of Dickinson, North Dakota. Fisher Industries to the Department of Homeland Security and Lieutenant General Todd Samont. Anyway, he is the Commanding General of the Army Corps of Engineers. That's according to administration officials who spoke obviously under anonymity. A lot of people out there on snitch duty. Simone was summoned to the White House again on Thursday after the president's aide told Pentagon officials that General Mark Milley, that's the Army Chief of Staff, that the president wanted to discuss the border barrier, according to officials there, again on anonymity, after the Army didn't accept the bid to install barriers along the southern border, a contract potentially worth billions of dollars. So this is what this fight is about, $1 billion. The president is one of the country's most successful builders and knows better than anyone how to negotiate a better deal. I bet he does. Fisher's chief executive, Tommy Fisher, is going on conservative TV and radio claiming that his company could build more than 200 miles of barrier in less than a year. He has quoted Washington directly, meeting with various people. Even as Trump pushed for his firm, Fisher already has started building a section of fencing in some place called Sunland Park, New Mexico. We built a wall, a non-profit that includes prominent conservatives who support the president. And on that particular advisory board is the right-wing Stephen Bannon, old Eric Prince, Kurt Kobash, Tom Tensino, I think he's out of Colorado, another right-winger. The first section is expected to be unveiled soon. Fisher brand equipment and workers were visible this week, preparing the site outside of El Paso, with the feet of the International Border Monument 1 in place since 1855. So this Fisher character has been all around the place. Repeated attempts to influence the Army Corps of Engineers, contract decisions, show the degree to which the president is willing to insert himself in. This is teapot dome type behavior. Designed regulations, process designed to protect the U.S. government from accusations, of favoritism. He doesn't know this is just can't be allowed. Most recently, the president insisted the structure be painted black and topped with spikes, gambling to aides that the Army Corps' contracting process, grumbling, to aides is holding back his ambitions. The Army Corps should consider alternatives, according to administrative officials. Why not French doors? The president added. Anyway, this dribble. Let me finish this up here. Fish has repeatedly appeared in conservative media, including Fox News, taunting his plan, denouncing bureaucracy, no doubt about it. This has been a favorite cover for conservatives. Host demonstrations of construction techniques in Arizona with Kramer, Bill Hopalong Cassidy from Louisiana, guy that tried to destroy the Affordable Care Act. Collecting private donations, they raised $22 million, but they expect to get it back tenfold, no doubt about that. Officials from the Army Corps and DHS then met with Kirshner several times, and this is influence peddling, to explain why Fisher's wasn't the best deal. Kirshner was intimately interested in the cost of the wall, while other companies were being chosen over Fisher. So Fisher is not a bargain basement operator, he's a bloodsucker. Now this Kramer guy is a guy that unseated Heidi Heidekant and retired her to wherever. So he's in North Dakota. Enough of this ridiculousness. Trump wants to have Barr, his patsy, declassify intelligence related to the Russian probe. That'll be an interesting situation to declassify these. It gives Barr broad powers. He evidently signed an act ordering U.S. intelligence agencies to cooperate promptly with Barr's audit of investigation into Russian election interference. This has always been a slippery slope for us, this whole Russian interference thing, and potentially could be, as they say in the hood, a trick bag. Russian interference, so-called Russian interference, had very little to do with the defeat of Hillary Rodham Clinton in 2016. More germane to the issue was voter suppression being one of the major factors there. Dirty campaigning, yes, from Cambridge Analytica, yes, but that was not the so-called Russian influence situation. There were targeted commercials, but they're always targeted commercials. Back to the case of Century, the people of California versus Orenthal James Simpson. We had in various groups people that were paid, people that represented various right-wing causes, including the white supremacists themselves, and all those people were rooting for the conviction of O.J. Simpson. Nothing new there. And people masquerading as this, wearing masks. Well, the same situation. They came out in 2008. If you remember the Burfords, you won't hear about them anymore. That was a group of right-wingers that were brought in by the Republican Party to delegitimize Barack Obama of Chicago on the birth certificate. Trump participated in this scheme, and when it fell apart on him, he went to the transcript. We didn't hear much about that. That disappeared also. And one of his running buddies, I forget this clown's name, he went in to see the FBI. But all this was a scam. It was meant to influence people like the ones that work at the Museum of Fine Art in Boston to move to the Trump corner, so to speak, a boxing type of situation. And they did move there in small numbers, but nonetheless the movement was, you can have minuscule, this is one of the things about polling, you can have very small numbers, we'll say 1%, because a lot of polls will say the candidate has a 4% advantage, and in reality that is in the poll's margin of error, so the candidate probably only has a 1 to 2% advantage at most, unless the turnout is skewed. Now that can be skewed by just simply more people turn out, or voter suppression there, or other things, what we call the Malcolm X factor, that people feel there's just nothing to vote for there, as with Hillary Rodham Clinton. A lot of African Americans, a lot of Bernie supporters either stayed home or voted for Jill Stein, the Green Party, or whatever. But you have all of this mix, and to spend time, as the mayor-elect of Chicago said, she doesn't have time to focus on foolishness. She's moving on with actual real things, and that's a very good start. If she can keep up the momentum there in Chicago and establish some transparency and wheel in those automatic types there that have been literally robbing the people, disrepresenting the people for time immemorial. We'll see how that model survives. The unfortunate thing is she's been forced to keep on the cast of characters, some of the cast of characters that have been around there and been ineffective. You can't throw all the rascals out at once, but we'll assume she'll get around to them. She does have more than a 1-year term to move on this. Let me just finish this up here. The president has labeled the investigations campaign a political witch hunt. Tricky Dicky basically said the same thing. The very first step in rectifying and replacing the damage done by certain people at the FBI. That's from Mark Meadows. Well, he's with a right-wing caucus. This is very interesting. This administration and these cronies are pro-law enforcement, but yet they're against the FBI. Now, from Jeremy Bush, he's a former chief of staff at the CIA during the Obama administration, warned that with this directive is entering a dangerous territory, stripping intelligence leaders of the ability to control information about sources and methods. That's been argued since time, and when handling the power to political actors could cause human agents to question whether their identity. This is the same thing they're charging Julian Assange with, and want to put him in jail for 10 plus years. Period. Alright, let's move on to Julian Assange and being charged the Espionage Act. Incidentally, that is the same thing they charged Daniel Ellsberg with. Press freedom advocates, and we're going to do a special incidentally on this, said the distinction drawn by prosecutors offers little protection for journalists, noted the media lawyer Floyd Abrams, that Assange may be a singular, unattractive defendant in a lot of ways, but they added that the indictment does raise a deep threat, the First Amendment issues for journalists who cover national defense, intelligence, and the like. And you have to remember, these various newspapers, the Times, the Guardian, the Post, all published those reports. Bruce Brown, he's the executive director of Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, said in a statement that the indictments were a dire threat to journalism. No doubt. And this is where, and this can't be labeled unintended consequences. These are intended consequences. Dictators and people that rally around, the cheerleaders, always want to silence the press. Now, this is not a matter of quote-unquote the free press, the corporate press. Yes, well, the corporate press normally, most of the time, with a few exceptions, go along to get along. But there are independent people out there, like Julian Assange, that get this information and report it. Period. So we'll leave this and return to it later. Period. And some of this will have to go to the week that was. The Elizabeth Warren, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez demands answers on the Sears bankruptcy. You'll hear from them, from this Mnuchin here, Mnuchin, excuse me, I didn't pronounce his name correctly there. And the Sears holding company, the pension plan, which were underfunded by about $1.4 million, affecting more than 90,000 workers. This is the store filed for bankruptcy in October, subsequently handing over responsibility to two pension funds. This is the Pension Benefits Guarantee Corporation, which is overseen by old Mnuchin himself. So they were at where were they at? They were at Yale together and Lamper. Anyway, Sears, of course, was founded in 1893 as a mail-order business. It was then called Sears and Roebuck. An African American was in the mix there. An African was in the mix. So this is some of the schemes here. The Sears board of directors paid $40 million to settle a lawsuit alleging that Lamper had tried to siphon off the company's best real estate by selling it to his own investment company. Oh boy, this is just too much. Let's go to ESPN here, and we have this epic struggle here in the East. The Raptors 105-99 over the Bucks. Bucks a very good team, but they find themselves now behind 3-2 in the contest. Who will win this? And this was in Milwaukee. Well, the Raptors are hot now. It's kind of impossible sometimes in basketball to come up with the final situation. We'll go to Major League Baseball simply because of time here. The Nationals were at the Mets in New York. Mets 6-4. Pirates 14-6 over the Rockies in Pittsburgh. Yankees 6-5 over the Orioles in Camden Yards. The Sox win 8-2 over Toronto. The Marlins beat the Tigers 5-2. The Phillies beat our Cubs. Unfortunately, that was a game the Cubs actually had gotten back into 9-7. Let me get the live score here. Phillies had 12 hits, no errors, and the Cubs 11 hits and 1 error. And in 13, Atlanta and Giants in San Francisco. Atlanta pulled it out 5-4. The Twins had a slugfest in Los Angeles, 16-7 over the Angels. The Rays and Cleveland Rays 7-2. And the White Sox and the Astros in Houston. The Sox win the game. 4-0. Shut them out. And here we go again. We'll save this till tomorrow night. This is the Stanley Cup coming up. Who would have guessed? The Bruins and Blues. How they were built. Who has the edge? Well, we'll explore it all from ESPN. And some of the soccer scores here. UANL 1-0 over Leon. And VfB Stuttgart and FC Union Berlin 2-2. Argentina 3-1 over Uruguay. And the Croatians 2-0 over Laura. And that's nothing there. Argentinos Juniors 1-0 over Despot Tolina. Some of these teams I've never heard of, and you probably have not either. I'm trying to find some Mexico, and this is under 20 in the World Cup. Mexico and Italy 2-1 Italy. Senegal 3-0 Tahiti. Anyway, Japan and Ecuador 1-1. Poland, Colombia 2-0 over Poland. I'll have to figure out a way to do this. International in the CCL 3-1. Boy, if I can just get through this. Anyway, Sports Boys, Wales beaten by Bolivia 2-1. Whoever they are. And finally, Machino FC 2-2 over Tasker, whoever they are. Anyway, we'll get some of the U.S. type of situation. Oh, we almost forgot Larry Sabato. Notes on the state of the Senate. Well, we'll go this kind of briefly here because we're running late here. Senate retirements are not having a dramatic effect. These are some of the takeaways here. Democrats have missed on some Senate recruits, and that may or may not matter. Alabama and Colorado remain the likeliest states to flip, but the Democrats held Hammer State the likeliest of all. Arizona is a pure toss-up. Republicans remain favored. Retirements are not having a drastic effect, no doubt about that. Red Montana and West Virginia had Joe Tester and Joe Manchin not run for re-election in their respective states, but they did. So you forget those. Retirements also could improve Mike Makers on the road to general election. For instance, mile makers. The crystal ball deems a surprise retirement of Olympia Snow. That was in 212 there. Flipping the chamber, Angus King ended up winning the seat. Well, he's a true independent. And they go back, to Tom Harkin, Carl Levin, Max Baucus. He was in Montana. Tim Johnson was in South Dakota. He retired. He had been ailing. Jay Rockefeller there in West Virginia was a legend. And retirees, Tom Udall, he's in New Mexico. Pat Roberts, who had to rest up in Kansas, is now resting up. Lamar Alexander in Tennessee. Mike Inzi in Montana. That's the one where old Cheney's daughter may or may not run there. So we kept all these races as safe Republican. Another open seat in Tennessee. But the Democrats are there see hopeless, given the strong Democratic candidate is a good Democratic election. The former they ran Breslin once, and he couldn't even get within a single digit now. And old right-wing marcher Blackburn in that race in Tennessee. The Democratic Party in Tennessee has to be rebuilt from the old days. Early stories of the races for the Senate involved Democrats who have decided not to run for the Senate. Hickenlooper in Colorado, Steve Bullock in Montana, Beto O'Rourke, an open option for the presidential race. He's in. Stacey Abrams, who lost the gubernatorial race in Georgia, also took a pass and may still be mulling a presidential bid. Well, in Iowa, we can forget about it there. Cindy Axney, I guess. Anyway, let me just skip on down here. Alabama and Colorado seem the likeliest states to flip. Candidate recruitment, the eventual counsel to Doug Jones and Cory Gardner remain unknown, and we character both these races as toss-ups. Our take is in Colorado. They have a good chance of getting rid of Cory Gardner. In Alabama, we don't know who beat, anyway. Judge Moore. Well, Judge Moore could run again also. Gardner made the whims of forces he does not control. Colorado isn't nearly as far as the presidential level for Republicans as Alabama is for Democrats. No doubt. Arizona, a pure toss-up state there. In some ways an outpost of conservative Deep South, at least in terms of its early migration and party identification. That was Barry Goldwater's state. And Reagan, father of modern-day conservatism. Then Barry Goldwater is the grandfather, no doubt about that. Yet Arizona Republicans came within 3.5 of backing Hillary Clinton in 2016. They did elect Miss Sinema this year around, and she used to be a Green Party person. Anyway, Ernest McFarland lost to Goldwater. That was in 50. That was a long time ago. It was a different Arizona at that time, totally different. Christian Simmons allowed us was outside Republican groups held their fire too long. Christine Siminer, yeah, we were talking about her doing unopposed primary while the Republicans slugged through their own situation. Siminer was able to withstand the negative attacks there, and she's now in the Senate and will be there. Now McSally is back on the ballot, this time running as an appointed senator. She's serving out John McCain's term. Now, Mark Kelly, he's a former astronaut married to Gabby Giffords. Kelly has gotten off to an astonishing fundraising start. No doubt, we see him all the time. A newcomer, like his candidate, represents a recruiting success for the Democrats there. And interesting to see how Kelly does. Republicans hoping to muddy Kelly's reputation early in the race have started attacking him over some paid speeches. Well, you have to remember those paid speeches there. And let's see, 2022. Yeah, well, former Senator Scott Brown was the nominee. Oh well, yeah, get that. Elizabeth Warren beat him fairly squarely. McSally would be running in the same state in the November election each time if, in fact, the GOP nominee in 2020 and 2022. GOP remains a favorite overall. Arizona looms as large because it's hard to really piece together a plausible path to a Democratic majority without flipping it. Well, they're working on it. Democrats, assuming that the Democrats lose Alabama but win Arizona. Well, Alabama is a tough nut to crack. There is no doubt about that. Let's look very quickly at some polling here. And we'll have to take a very quick look. We're running a little bit over, but that's okay. The Monmouth University, we have them out, and we have the Hill Harris X poll. Basically speaking, they're about the same. Joe Lunchbox Biden is leading 33, and Bernie is at 14. Bernie's at 15, the Monmouth poll. So that's primarily the difference. Elizabeth Warren is at 10 and 8. She's been coming up in these polls. Harris at 6. And let's see, Beto O'Rourke. Where's old Beto? 6. So that's basically where he is. These polls don't mean as much because they have Biden up by 18, by 19. He's not going to stay up by 18 and by 19. You have to look at it that Biden has the established Democrats. They coalesced around him at this point in time. But the other candidates are spread out there. You have Bernie, you have Elizabeth Warren, who is ticking up a little bit, and Beto O'Rourke. Booker hasn't done very much. Now, Amy Klobuchar is at 3 in the Mama poll. And where is she? Yeah, she's at 1, but Booker, this is in the Hill poll. I would expect her to do there. She's one, as I see, as a sleeper candidate. Now, also, Senator Gillibrand out of New York has a program of national service. They've been around before, and 2 years of community college, whereas Bernie is offering that for free. All these are generators for the future and be looked at there. But Elizabeth Warren, with this traction on Sears, now that resonates with people. Sears was a big retailer. Her mother worked there, and they had a good reputation, and a lot of people identify there. It'll be interesting with these core issues that she's bringing up, economic issues, how well she's able to do in places like West Virginia, even some place like Louisiana, North and South Carolinas. Her name is getting around. There's no doubt about that. And Bernie is out there in the Huskings. Beto O'Rourke, who started out, and no doubt he's a very effective speaker. He's reorganizing his campaign. Twitter King Booker, who is a nominal speaker, is kind of trapped there. But Kamala Harris' advantage is she has California, and she will do very well in California. Depends on how she does in the other states. And she's a good debater. Now, Kristen Gillibrand is trying to get into the debates. And some of these people are better debaters. Elizabeth Warren will do well in the debates. Bernie will do well in the debates. Beto has had a lot of debate experience. Amy Klobuchar has had a lot of debate experience. Some of these people are going to start to flower, so to speak, and that's what you need to do in June and I guess July of this year. And they'll have two-tier debates. Will the second tier actually get any of those people get in the first tier? Well, it'll be interesting to see. A lot of this is going to depend on where Joe Lunchbox Biden is, whether he can stand up to the attacks, so they're going to have to throw mud at old Joe, and where DJ Trump is. You know, there could be a situation where neither Joe Lunchbox Biden or DJ Trump are even on the ballot in 2020. You never know. And that would alter the election more so than what would happen to a Bernie Sanders or Gillibrand or some of these people there, or Beto O'Rourke, if he moves here, moves there, and who will be the vice presidential candidates. That's a mechanism we'll have to look at. Nonetheless, this will do it for us. Have a good weekend, everyone. Boston Red here on the 24th of May, 2019. On to Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the Sears situation. We'll see you on the political channel, Boston Red, on Saturday morning. And also we'll have a numbers man this weekend. We'll be looking at the numbers as we usually do. Incidentally, petroleum futures that went down. And we'll get into that, and perhaps we'll get another open source report, because we'll be traveling next week. I have surgery next week, so a lot of things coming in there. Period. Good day.
Steven Mnuchin is President Trump's Treasury Secretary, and he is a walking example of what happens when rich and powerful people put other rich and powerful people into power. Mnuchin was on the board of Goldman Sachs, and then he went to serve on the board of Sears.
Yeah, but it's not the old Sears. Now, when my daddy had a heart attack when I was a girl, my mama got a full-time job, minimum wage, answering phones at Sears. Now, today it's a very different Sears.
Mm-hmm. And that's because in the early 2000s, Steven Mnuchin's old college roommate, a private investment fund owner named Eddie Lampert, put his friend, Steven Mnuchin, on the Sears board. And then he drove the company into the ground.
For the better part of a decade, Eddie Lampert's name has been inextricably tied with Sears, but at this stage, it's really unclear whether his hedge fund ESL investments generated returns or losses.
Eddie Lampert is a guy who likes to want to be a winner, and this was an L.
Instead of investing in the company, He sucked about $6 billion in value out of it and then did stock buybacks, which certainly made him a lot of money.
He loaded Sears with huge amounts of debt, making it hard to withstand shocks to the retail industry and the 2008 financial crisis, because debt is what makes Wall Street money. He closed over 3,500 stores and fired more than 250,000 workers.
And talk about conflicts. Lampert even sold Sears real estate to himself and then rented that real estate back to Sears at prices he helped set.
Sears filed for bankruptcy. Thousands of workers lost their jobs, but Eddie Lampert, he likely walked away with billions.
Yeah. Now, if this sounds crazy to you, it's because it is. And it's not just Sears.
Take my constituents in the Bronx. Last year, private equity groups took over Toys R Us and fired 38,000 workers without giving them the severance pay that they were promised. Retail workers and workers across the country deserve so much better.
Yeah. And they also deserve a Treasury Secretary who fights for them, not someone who spent a decade raking in cash for himself at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Sears employees.
So we've sent Stephen Mnuchin a letter asking him what he did as a member of the Sears board when Eddie Lampert proposed gutting the business, closing it, and buying back stock rather than investing in workers. I think it's important that we know how the secretary felt about this course of action at that time.
That's right. We think the American people deserve answers, and we're out there to fight for them.
That's right.